In 1863, Abraham Lincoln codified the last Thursday of November as the date for the holiday of Thanksgiving, which was the date that Thanksgiving was celebrated on until 1939, which was during the last years of the Great Depression. In 1939, the last Thursday of November fell on November 30th, the last day of the month. Americans usually don't start Christmas shopping until after Thanksgiving, so business leaders were concerned that having Thanksgiving on such a late date, and therefore a shorter shopping season, would cause consumers to spend less on Christmas shopping. On August 15th, 1939, the then President Franklin Roosevelt announced via executive proclamation that Thanksgiving would occur a week earlier that year to increase the length of the shopping season and hopefully to boost the economy. Perhaps surprisingly, this proclamation was met with some pretty fierce backlash. The change was given with a relatively short amount of notice, so the holiday plans of many Americans were affected. Many college football programs had scheduled their seasons to end on Thanksgiving and were concerned that if the date of Thanksgiving was changed, attendance to the final games on Thanksgiving would be much smaller. Many calendar companies had already printed calendars years in advance, so a change to Thanksgiving would mean that many already printed calendars would become inaccurate. So some people, mostly Republicans, said that Roosevelt's move was an example of government overreach. Alf Landon, for example, who had recently run against Roosevelt during a presidential election, said the following about Roosevelt's proclamation, quote, "This declaration is another illustration of the confusion which Roosevelt's impulsiveness has caused so frequently during his administration. If the change has any merit at all, more time should have been taken working it out instead of springing it upon an unprepared country with the omnipotence of a Hitler." So Roosevelt's political opponent compared Roosevelt to Hitler as a result of this. I guess some things haven't changed very much. Senator Styles Bridges of New Hampshire suggested that while Roosevelt was at it, he should abolish winter. Some more. Kansas Governor Payne Ratner said that in his state, quote, "We do not destroy tradition merely to gain newspaper headlines." Also, Maine's Republican Governor Louis O. Barrows waved aside a turkey he was to have carved at a formal banquet. He said, "You wouldn't eat oysters in July. You wouldn't eat a turkey on November 23rd. After which he whipped from his pocket a can of sardines and ate them." That'll show him. The controversy didn't have a name until, in response to the Democratic mayor of New Jersey announcing that New Jersey would celebrate Thanksgiving on the earlier date, the Republican mayor of Atlantic City coined the absolutely devastating name Franksgiving, a portmanteau of Thanksgiving and Franklin Roosevelt. The White House also received a large volume of letters from citizens opposed to the change. One letter read, quote, "Mr. President, I see by the paper this morning where you want to change Thanksgiving Day to November 23rd, of which I heartily approve. Thanks. Now, there are some things that I would like to have done and would appreciate your approval. Have Sunday changed to Wednesday, have Mondays to be Christmas, have it strictly against the will of God to work on Tuesday, have Thursdays to be payday with time and 1/2 for overtime." Okay, you get the point. This controversy also appeared in various media. For example, in the 1942 movie Holiday Inn, which was the premiere of the song White Christmas, there was a confused animated turkey that was featured, jumping back and forth on a calendar, unsure of the date of Thanksgiving until it gave up, looked at the audience, and shrugged its shoulders, which was a reference to this bonanza. In the end, in 1939, only 23 out of 48 states and Washington, D.C. celebrated Thanksgiving on November 23rd. 22 states decided to keep the original date of November 30th, and the remaining 3 states, including Colorado, Mississippi, and Texas, said screw it and declared holidays on both the 23rd and the 30th. By 1940, the states were still divided, with 32 states in Washington, D.C., celebrating on the earlier date, November 21st, while 16 states chose the so-called Republican Thanksgiving, which was on the 28th. By May of 1941, due to a disappointing Commerce Department finding that the earlier Thanksgiving date had had little effect on the economy, Roosevelt decided that he'd move the date back to the last Thursday in November in 1942, admitting that the experiment had not worked. Although some modern studies, for example, a study done by Robert Urbach of Iowa State University done in 2012, have found that earlier Thanksgivings do in fact tend to lead to improved economic stimulus. So it might not be so true that earlier Thanksgiving dates had no effect on the economy in the 40s. However, by the end of 1941, Congress had passed a joint resolution, which was signed by Roosevelt, which made a compromise about the date of Thanksgiving, which declared the date of Thanksgiving to be on the fourth Thursday of November, meaning that Thanksgiving would always be between November 22nd and November 28th, and never on the last 2 days of the month. The next year to have 5 Thursdays was in 1944, and in that year, most states decided to go with the same date as the joint resolution, the fourth Thursday of the month, and not the 5th. Although not all states went with the joint resolution. However, by the next year, 1945, which also had 5 Thursdays, all but 2 states had chosen the fourth Thursday to be Thanksgiving instead of the 5th. And from what I can tell, after that, the fourth Thursday of November was just accepted by everyone to be the date of Thanksgiving. And so there you go. That's how you get the date of modern Thanksgivings, which is pretty crazy, if you ask me.